did you notice a big difference between the Western perception of Saudi before 9/11 versus after 9/11?
When I was a kid in the United States, which is pre 9/11, nobody knew what Saudi Arabia was. When children want to, like make fun of me or something, they would just say, "Hey, this Indian guy."
For a lot of people, Osama bin Laden represented Saudi Arabia in people's imaginations for a while.
True.
What most people didn't get is that his primary goal was actually to overthrow the Saudi government.
That's correct. That's something people don't know. He was our enemy before he was the enemy of the West.
I think Islam hates us.
They have done nothing except wreak havoc and terror for our faith and our religion.
Professed values of the Western countries, democracy and constitutional and human rights, at least they should speak about this.
And it's like, I feel like religion just is making it worse. They say they believe in God, but I think they're just anxious.
Before we talk about politics, let's look at the fundamental things.
That when we stand up to those who oppress our communities, that Allah accepts from us that as a form of jihad.
And it requires people with guts to follow God in an era that everyone does whatever is right in their eyes.
Will you distance yourself from those who think differently? Or will you join us at the table and talk about what is really important? This is the Al-Ma'idah Initiative, conversation without compromise.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Al-Ma'idah Initiative podcast. Today I am joined by Dr. Abdurrahman bin Nuh, who is from Saudi Arabia, and today we are talking about the subject of what the West gets wrong about Saudi Arabia as a country and as a culture. So we met through the YouTube comments on another video we made about the Dragon Ball theme park in Saudi Arabia, which I'm like really excited about. So can you tell me a little bit about your life experience? Because I believe you've lived in the US and Saudi, and you kind of have a unique perspective on this. Can you give me a little background on what that is?
Before I do, in true Arab fashion, I would like to read my poem that I wrote on Al-Ma'idah, if you allow me.
I'd love it.
Okay. So the poem is Al-Ma'idah, a verse of understanding. In the heart of sands where histories blend, Al-Ma'idah set a table to amend the tales misunderstood far and wide, where echoes of Arabia reside. A land of dates and towers that kiss the sky, not just deserts dry and camels shy. Beneath the surface, complexities lie, rich tales that no single truth can tie. Invited to speak, a voice from the dunes, bridges words like the rarest of tunes, correcting the sights, the sounds misheard, sharing the truth through every word. Here at the table, let's feast on ideas, on culture's richness that always endears. Saudi, a land of warm, vibrant themes, far more than a mere stereotype deems. So gather round the table so grand, as misconceptions will gently reprimand. From Riyadh to Jeddah, let's insights flow. In the podcast's glow, let understanding grow. Thank you.
That was amazing.
Oh, okay.
No one's ever written a poem for us before. Thank you.
Yeah, it's fine. I love doing it, and I mean it in the word. I love the name Al-Ma'idah, the table, or it just sounds. It sounds like convenient. It sounds good to what you guys are trying to do. So yeah, that's nice. To your question, yes, I lived in the United States. My father went to the United States in 1990. He is a maxillofacial surgeon. He's retired now. He did his residency, his fellowship, and further academic education in Boston University and in Tufts. So we lived in the Boston area in Massachusetts. That's why I'm a Celtics fan till now. We just got the championship. I lived with him in a town called. We lived for like a year in Quincy, but I don't remember that. I was too young. And then we lived in Malden, Massachusetts, for the rest of the time. So when I grew up, I actually grew up in the United States, and we would go to Saudi Arabia in the summer. So I actually saw the perspective of, I saw Saudi Arabia from a different perspective. I can see, because I wasn't raised there, I can truly see the differences in the two societies. And I think that's why I feel that I have a perspective different from others. Yeah, if you have any questions about my time in Malden, I can go ahead and.
So your entire childhood, from your first memories, are in the U.S. then?
I was born in 1988. So
Okay.
I was from the age of 2 years old to the age of 12 years old. We lived in the state in Boston, or in Malden, a city near Boston. We would come to Saudi Arabia every summer for 3 months. So at that time period, yeah, I was more in touch with Western culture and Western, pop culture. And the 90s was a great era. Yeah, it was full of a lot of fun stuff.
Okay, yeah, I was born 89, so we were probably
Okay.
watching the same shows on TV in our childhood, right?
Most likely, yeah.
So, I'm curious then. So you can't have been a complete shock to move back, but how was that for you, moving from the US to Saudi Arabia in what, 2000?
Yes, it was. I mean, it's probably going to surprise you, but my father, after he finished his training there, he said, how about staying here for, he was consulting us as his children and his wife. How about, just live here and, not go back. And we were really against it, me and my sister and my younger brother at that time, because maybe because we saw Saudi Arabia, we went there in summertime, and we saw the huge family, and I had 10, 15 cousins. We would play football, and it was, in our mindset, this was how they lived all year long, but it was probably just during the summer where everybody was having fun. So we didn't want to stay in the United States. We actually wanted to go back to Saudi. We loved the family, how it's all together. My cousins were very close to me, and we saw Saudi Arabia as the place where we would have fun. The United States is where you have to wake up to school, and your mother will remove the ice from the car when she takes you to school in Boston. So it wasn't a fair analysis from our side as children. We didn't make a fair decision, but I wouldn't change it. If I had, in retrospect, if I had a time machine, I would choose the same thing. As much as the West gave the world, I wouldn't want to raise my child there, to be honest. So that's the answer.
So I'm curious, off script here, you talk about not wanting to raise a child in the West. What exactly would be the hang up for you of raising your kid in the US? There are many issues, but it's trying to be politically correct. The West tries to be politically correct all the time in things that you don't really need to be politically correct. And I mean, for one, let's say sexual preferences. One's sexual preferences is not something that I would want to teach my child in school. I don't want to walk also, and I don't want my child. Maybe here we get some media that is not really also very clear, but from what I understood, that children in the West do get an education of they talk about gay relationships. I saw the guy in Canada with the huge breasts. I don't know if you know him, the balloon-sized breasts. He was a workshop teacher, and they couldn't, how the guy had a balloon-sized breast, and he was teaching children in junior high, which is middle school, I believe. It's just not acceptable. It's just too much sexualization for children at that age. I mean, I'm all with children should choose what
preference they want, no problem there. However, like feeding them these things is just not a place where I want my children to grow up. Another thing is, the U.S. of today is not the U.S. of yesterday. My honeymoon was in Los Angeles. I love going to the United States. It's just a fun place to be. And recently I went there, and in California, it's just not the place that I know. Too much homeless people in the streets, people, high on drugs, running around. And you hear all the things that happen in the news where, it's just a scary place. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I don't feel that my child I can let him go, go to the playground by himself. I just don't feel safe. Specifically as an Arab, like him being an Arab kid there, maybe it will increase in that. But in general, I will not feel safe there. In contrast here,
So I think.
Go ahead.
So I think with what you're saying about the U.S., I think it's important to understand that what you're saying is true, but it's not true everywhere.
All right.
But where I live, what you're saying is true. That's. Yeah. I live in Seattle, and we homeschool our kids specifically because of the Seattle public school system. So if you want to not participate in that kind of culture here, you have to work extra hard to kind of build a sort of independent subculture.
Yeah.
And it's just a lot of extra work to do it here. For us, it's worth the work, but I can understand why somebody wouldn't want to live here and put up with all of that.
Right. I can also understand that you probably have a community around you that will share your ideas and the way that you want to raise your children. Maybe many in the Middle East will not have that kind of privilege, having a community where it'll become easier. They're probably going to do it alone. So that's also something to think about. Yeah.
Right. And we're trying to help those people feel like they have more community here
Right.
in Seattle as well,
That's good,
because, any big, this can happen in any big city, but especially in a, West Coast city with a very individualist mindset, it's very, very easy to feel isolated living somewhere
Right.
like this. And that culture and community here, it can exist, but it's not automatic. You have to work really hard to maintain it here.
Okay.
So I'm curious then, right? So if that's kind of the appeal of Saudi, warm weather, cousins, community, fun, different pace of life. How was the ground reality here? Because you're a doctor now, right? You're a GP,
Yeah,
right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So obviously your entire life can't have just been kind of relaxing, playing soccer with your cousins.
No, we hard work. Yeah.
So, so what was the transition back to Saudi like when you got back for you?
The only thing that was different for me was school, because I never went to school here in Saudi Arabia. So the big change for me was going to school in Saudi Arabia, which is different than going to school in Malden. Both of them had their challenges, but it was different. One of the things that I think we can learn from, of course, one important point was, in school in 2002 or 2001 is very different from, how my son is going to school now. I mean, we have changed a lot through this 24 years, you know what I mean? So, but speaking at that point in time, it was a different time than what we live in now. School was it's an all boys school, so you have to imagine 25 boys, in one room. You can imagine how boys can get. So
I went to an all boys school in England.
Yeah, I mean, you probably would understand. Boys are tough, when we had men teachers, male teachers. So I never had a male teacher when I was in the States. It was always a female teacher, which was, women are better than men in some aspects of teaching and understanding children. I just believe in that. They have a better way with dealing with children. Men just don't get it, I guess. So my experience at the beginning was tough, but as a human beings are in nature adaptive. They can adapt to any different environment, and we adapted. And school had its positives, had its negatives, and as opposed to the West. But I do have to underline that it has changed a lot. It has changed a lot from where it used to be. Education is much better than the education I had when I was, in middle school and in high school. So I finished high school. I think my English language helped me a lot in getting accepted in one of the most prestigious schools we have in Saudi Arabia, King Saud University, which is a government, which is a free government college, which means that the competition is harsh. You can't go there with dad's money or anything like that. You have to really get good grades and work hard. Again, I was privileged with having a good English language, which was a big part of the grading system to be accepted. And that's how I became a GP.
Great. So the kind of premise of this episode then is, what do you think the West gets wrong about Saudi Arabia?
I think there are many things the West gets wrong about Saudi Arabia. And when you say the West, who do you mean exactly? Do you mean like Western media? Do you mean the regular James? Or who do you mean exactly?
Yeah, let's talk about, like, just for me, I'm thinking the average British or American person.
Okay.
Because, I've been both of those at some point in my life.
Brits, understand Saudi Arabia better than Americans. You have to differentiate there. I believe that British people do have, not to the extent where I'm saying, they really do understand, but you can't compare the two. The Americans are living in a bubble somewhat. And when it comes
where are you? You seem to have a high opinion of British people. Where are you meeting your British people?
No, not. I'm telling in their understanding of Middle Eastern history, not necessarily that they are good or bad or whatever. No, I'm just saying that their understanding. They have less misconceptions. Yeah. They did a lot of wrong things in the past. I understand that, but today they have less misconceptions than what the United States do have or Americans have on Saudis.
Well, let's focus on the American misconceptions.
Let's do that. Okay. So one thing that they get wrong is thinking that Saudi Arabia is run by a religious theology, which is not fair. Saudi is not run by a religious theology. It's run by a monarchy that is meritocratic and not really theologic. It's more pragmatic than it is religious. That's one thing. The other thing is the misconception of what an Arab is, the history of Arabia, Arabia's influence to civilization, Arabia's influence to advancement. Many think that Arabia is just this backwater place where nothing came out of it other than just religion, which is not true. Actually, we can touch upon the many people who came out of this peninsula that have affected civilization. One of them is, for instance, Al-Farabi or Ibn Khaldun, which talked about sociology and the difference between civilizations. And Al-Farabi had a book in the year 900 talking about, his book was titled The Virtuous City, which was basically the first person to describe, what do you call it in English? What do you call the city that's so good? Utopia. Yeah. So he was really the first person who kind of, really dig deep into what is a utopia, what makes something a utopia. And we can go ahead and talk about, let's say, Al-Andalus in modern day Spain, which was, had Arabian people living in it at that time. It was responsible for the European Renaissance. So a lot of people, what they don't get right is thinking that, this is this backwater civilization, not taking account its deep history, its influence on the world, its influence on other people, its contribution to the advancement of human civilization. There's one thing that I just learned not long ago, which really was interesting to me. The Arabic language obviously influenced many languages, like it influenced the Turkish language, Urdu, it influenced Persian, but that's not the most language it influenced. The most language that was affected by Arabic was Spanish, was the European language.
Yep.
So I mean, this is something that we don't talk about. This is something that is not talked about in Western culture. If you see, like, let's say in American movies, when they portray an Arabian person, it's either some guy in like a camel in the desert, like this crazy person, or some kind of terrorist. It's not a fair description of who the Arabs are, who they were, and how they see themselves. We see ourselves as a big part of contributors to civilization. We are extremely proud of ourselves. We wear the thobe not because we don't have a choice. No, we wear the thobe because we are proud of the thobe. Another thing is that people think that women wear her abaya, or she covers her body in a way that is, like we forced it into her. That's not true. The law in Saudi Arabia today is that women are not forced to wear any kind of certain covering or anything. But even though this is the law, if you go on the street and you see women, they wear the things they wear because they feel comfortable wearing that. They feel this is what they want to wear. This is their freedom in how to wear their clothes. And sometimes they won't wear the same thing as what they wear here in Saudi Arabia because they feel uncomfortable in the West if they do. They are forced to wear a certain way in the West because they're afraid. They're afraid of what people would say to them, what people will do to them.
So quick question on the abaya thing.
Yeah.
So would it be an accurate understanding to say, like, some point before 2017, it would have been the law you had to wear that?
Yes, that's correct.
And then after 2017, it's no longer the law, you have to wear that?
Yes, that's correct.
So if you go through a mall in Riyadh, is every single woman going to be wearing an abaya? Or do you see, a few people without wearing it anymore?
Today, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Today there are Saudi women not wearing abaya at all, wearing Western clothing with hair. Not having a abaya on at all. So that's absolutely normal. The thing is, it isn't even the law that stopped many people. It's really the culture, being accepted. Maybe she didn't want to do that because she felt that people will look at her in a different way, regardless of the law. The law wasn't the issue most of the time. It was the people, the community. And I think,
right.
Even the community now is extremely different than it was in the past. People are much accepting of other. I believe Saudis were always accepting of others, different people, but they were never accepting of Saudis taking on different things. You know what I mean? But I think even that has changed. And still, most of Saudi women are women that see themselves at covering. They will cover themselves. They will wear more, I don't know what the word in Arabic and English is, but more unrevealing, more
modest.
Modest, there you go. Modest clothing as a choice and not as something that implemented on them from, their family or their community.
Yeah, so I've actually noticed this myself. When I first started meeting Saudis, it was 2012, and I had several Saudi friends I was pretty close with from 2015 to 2020, and like the amount of I was kind of like living those changes in Saudi culture and law through them, and it was really interesting to watch. And so meeting Saudi students in America in 2012, it was like talking to people from another planet in some ways.
Yeah.
And not everybody, but some people. whereas now, it's much the gap seems to be a lot smaller now.
Absolutely.
And the people I meet are generally more open-minded. They're more tolerant. Again, you're right. They always had the tolerance to outsiders, but I'm talking about tolerance towards like other Saudis.
Yes.
Of different worldviews and
absolutely
perspectives. Like, I know several Saudi Christians, and their lives over the last 8 years have improved drastically in Saudi society.
One thing that we have to also talk about is it's not people. One of the misconceptions that that we want to talk about is as if Saudis hate the West, or like they no. It's actually the opposite. People in Saudi Arabia do not see the West as like something that is threatening. You know what I mean? They don't care about how people in the West live their lives. It's on the contrary. They see the West as, especially the United States. When I say the West, I mean the U.S. They see it as this entity of mixed cultures and different peoples, and it has succeeded a lot, giving. If you see many Saudi people would love they would love to watch, let's say, Enemy and that sort of stuff, but also they've been following like Friends and Seinfeld since the 90s. You know what I mean? Not something new. They do find one of the most important things. Comedy is very hard to cross cultures. It's very hard to make somebody laugh in a different culture, but Saudis do find comedy in the United States as funny. So I think that there isn't really this feeling of the West is different, or we don't like. This is a misconception that we see the West as like the evil, or no, that's not true. We actually love stand-up comedy, and we love watching the stuff that's produced in the West.
So. There's all sorts of shady history between the West and the Middle East, but do you think, in general, it would be fair to describe the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia as a mutually beneficial relationship?
It definitely used to be a mutually benefit both of them. The agreement was simple. Saudi Arabia will sell the oil in dollars, and the United States will help Saudi Arabia in defending itself from any foe, and this was the case, I think, until recently, where Saudi Arabia purchases the weapons from the United States in advance. So we would purchase certain, let's say, like F-15s. These F-15s, after they are purchased, are made. After they are made, they are then sent to Saudi Arabia. So the purchase happens through the Department of Defense, and then the Department of Defense, they make the weapons, and then they send them back to Saudi Arabia. What happened recently was these weapons which Saudi Arabia, purchased, are not getting sent, even though we paid for them a long time ago. It was blocked by the Senate or something, and it happened multiple times in certain times when we really needed them most. We had, rockets flying into Saudi Arabia, where the Houthis were sending rockets on our cities and our oil fields, and we wanted, our Patriot missiles that defend from these rockets to be sent to us, and it was denied for some reason. So we really felt betrayal from that point. But if you look at the Saudi-American relationship going from Reagan, which really when it started, until now, we would see it as a mutual benefited both of them mutually, until recently when I think from the Obama administration things started to become different. Saudi Arabia felt that the United States is not cooperating with Saudi Arabia when it comes to Middle Eastern issues, and it seems like they are more interested in chaos than they are interested in stability in the region. For instance, we were talking about the Houthis since a long time ago, and the United States, didn't recognize the Houthis as a terrorist organization, but after the recent, issues in Palestine, in Israel and Palestine and Gaza, where the Houthis started to, be seen in the West, now they became the enemies of the United States, and the United States want to do something about it. So it's things like this where we felt that there have been shortcomings from the United States in that beneficial, in that agreement of oil for security.
So I'm curious, because I think the popular perception affects that relationship. Did you notice a big difference between the Western perception of Saudi before 9/11 versus after 9/11?
When I was a kid in the United States, which is pre 9/11, nobody knew what Saudi Arabia was. Nobody really knew anything about Saudi Arabia. They when children want to like make fun of me or something, they would just say, "Hey, this Indian guy." They wouldn't even know what Arabia was and what. So yes, I haven't been in the United States post 9/11, so I really can't touch on this. But from what I see in media, from what I see in U.S. culture, yes, there is this different view of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East in general. It's not only Saudi Arabia, but the Middle East in general after 9/11, which I think is not fair. Saudi Arabia doesn't have exclusive monopoly on crazy people. There are terrorists everywhere, and terrorists from all different skin colors, and just because the people who did do that were some of them were Saudis or Middle Eastern isn't fair to make the judgment that on Saudi Arabia as a country.
So I would have been about the same age as you when 9/11 happened,
Yeah.
and I think the biggest thing that I missed about Osama bin Laden, right? Because I think for a lot of people, Osama bin Laden represented Saudi Arabia in people's imaginations for a while.
True, yeah.
But I think what most people didn't get is that his primary goal was actually to overthrow the Saudi government.
That's correct. That's something people don't know. He was our enemy before he was the enemy of the West. That's something that people don't get. He sees as the Saudi Arabian government as heretical. He sees them as controlling the Holy Lands with no right to do that. So everything we had terrorist bombings in Riyadh in the mid 90s, and it became emphasized after the first Gulf War, where the liberation of Kuwait happened, because there was American troops in Saudi Arabia for that liberation process. And he finally found the alibi that he had, or the excuse to, you're working with the infidels now, which is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And since that time, since the Gulf War, going forward, was hell for Saudi Arabia. With we had terrorism before the world had it, and when these people ran away from Saudi Arabia. Where did they go? They not Osama bin Laden, but many others like him, went to the UK and went to the United States. And we said, bring these people back. These are terrorists. We want to deal with them. And the West called them dissidents. They didn't call them terrorists. They called them dissidents. And they said, no, you have to give people the right to express themselves. Have different views, and which was really frustrating. We saw these people as terrorists, and then when 9/11 happened, we kind of said, we told you so, but instead of had that, we got blamed for it, which is really funny.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was really frustrating.
Yeah. It's all very ironic in the scheme of things.
Yep.
So the transit, sort of kind of skipping a section here, but it's kind of a natural transition point, right? Because Saudi's problem is not that it's Osama bin Laden, right? Osama bin Laden was the arch enemy of the Saudi government
and the Saudi people. And the Saudi people. This is for, people did not want to go back into some kind of religious governing country. I mean, we did not want this. We want to go forward. Saudis want to liberalize much more than people think they do, but they want to do it upon their own, like cultural rules and their own way of seeing, liberalization.
You're a doctor. And in the last comment section, we had a guy who was like, Saudi culture is perfect and we have nothing to learn from you, right? Okay. I know that that's not, who you are. How would you accurately diagnose the problems that Saudi culture actually does have and how to overcome those?
Okay. I would love to talk about that, but let me give you a small introduction or something I would say before that, which is how we transformed after Mohammed bin Salman, or is known as MBS. He really represented the people that are he's my age and your age. He really represented the, because the people who ruled the country before him were 80-year-olds. And they represented the people at that time, you know what I mean? But the people of today, the leader that we have truly represents the Saudi people, he truly represents what the Saudi people are thinking and what the Saudi people see in their future. Something that we can't say in the past, but we truly want to say now. One thing that has changed is the kafala system. Something that was really a problem in the past. Somebody in your comment section spoke about it. The rule in the past was it was basically if one would want to work in Saudi Arabia, he needs a Saudi sponsor, and this Saudi sponsor had a lot of control on this individual who would come and work in Saudi Arabia. And expats could not have the right to own businesses. Expats did not have the right to maybe have freedom in the way, let's say, like in religious beliefs. All that has changed. The kafala system in itself has completely changed. Although the kafala system in the past was a weakness and it was something bad, it was because of the extreme growth of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia started, let's say, growing from 1975 until the 90s. That 15-year period, the growth that happened was huge, and trying to regulate everything was very hard. It's extremely hard to regulate everything at that time. So the kafala system basically gave the Saudi people sort of part of the burden in running things when it comes to expats. That changed. The laws completely changed now. You don't need a Saudi sponsor like you used to in the past. You can change your job. You can leave your job. You have rights, and all of that has, changed a lot.
So let's dig a little deeper into that, because I think I just want to highlight what the problem was, and correct me if I say anything that's wrong here. Mm-hmm. But part of my I haven't really researched this specific aspect of it, but I have a friend from Oman, and what I understand is one of the problems in Oman is that you'd have a lot of people who kind of work maybe harder than the Omanis, but also take less money and just end up taking over a lot of the industry in Oman. And the native Omanis were having a hard time having any work. And would it be a fair diagnosis to say that because Saudi Arabia was like 90% public sector jobs at one point, some of the money in Saudi Arabia was a little bit, easy. And the way Saudi society was transitioning, if you didn't have a, kafala system, then it would have been very easy for the native Saudis to kind of like lose any sort of position of work and in society. Is that fair?
Well, the kafala system, just to be clear, the kafala system was in private sector. So if in public sector the government is your kafil, so the government is your sponsor, so you really are not vulnerable to the things that could happen to you. The problem was not from being under the working for the public sector, because if you worked for the government as a non-Saudi, your rights were given. There wasn't a problem there. The problem was working for a private entity, working for a Saudi. And let me just make it clear to you what I mean here. So let's say that somebody owned a supermarket, like a small supermarket, okay? A Saudi had to own it. The non-Saudi could not own it. So, but then the non-Saudi would run this supermarket, okay, the store, whatever, it doesn't have to be a supermarket. And it will be under the Saudi person's name, although the non-Saudi would be running it. And after a while, if the Saudi citizen says, you're not giving me enough money, I want this much, or I'm gonna have to bring somebody else that works for your behalf, the immigrant, this expat, doesn't have a choice. He's under the mercy of this Saudi guy. This has changed. This has completely changed. And even this system was really bad for us as Saudis, because you could get somebody from Southeast Asia that would work for an extremely low pay, okay? And why would anybody want to employ a Saudi citizen who not going to accept that amount of pay? So this has changed. This has changed a lot for the better of these expats and for the better of the Saudi people who want to work in the private sector. So it went both ways. Yeah, it improved in both ways.
Yeah, it actually makes me think of in some ways it's similar to the way the U.S. relationship with the farming industry kind of works. Like the U.S. farming industry depends on a bunch of illegal immigrants, and the U.S. is not rounding up illegal immigrants and deporting them because it knows that the farming industry would collapse if they did that. So what should really happen in that situation is people need to move forward to giving those people some actual legal rights and recognition, but also being a little less high-minded about, because right now the standard is, well, somebody who lives here has to have this type of life, and if you can't give them that, then they just permit them under the table. Right. So everyone has this kind of migrant worker problem in one way, shape, or form. So honestly, another thing I've noticed about Saudi culture, I would say that if you met a Saudi in 2012 versus the kind of Saudi you meet today, I would say the average Saudi you meet now has like a better work ethic than they had in, say, 2012, 2013. Do you think that's a fair analysis, or am I just kind of having a...
I mean, I couldn't really comment on that because I work in the health sector. People are really serious in the health sector, Saudis and non-Saudis. Right. So I really can't, the people who worked with me, Saudis and non-Saudis, they were all really professional. They take healthcare, seriously. I don't feel that I have the right to, because I haven't really seen anything like that. But yes, I do hear something like that in the past, where Saudis feel like they weren't really motivated as much as they are now. I think they are much more motivated now than they were in the past. And let me tell you why. The rules in the past were, if you were, let's say, like a Saudi telecom company, okay, let's say the Saudi telecom company, you would have to employ 25% Saudis. This is a rule. You have to have 25% Saudis for you to be, accepted. So sometimes they would employ Saudis not really just for the fact that they want, they need them. They employ them just to fill in that, the quota that they need. So, which was really stupid, At this time, it's completely different. We're not going to tell companies who to employ and that. Instead, if you do employ a non-Saudi, non-Saudis have to pay for healthcare. Non-Saudis have to pay a yearly or annually tax. It's called to renew their residency. And the idea of that was Saudi Arabia, the government puts a lot of money in subsidizing water, subsidizing electricity, subsidizing healthcare, and a lot of other stuff. So it's only fair for these people who come from outside Saudi Arabia is to contribute into instead of, the government doesn't want to subsidize everything for these people who came from outside. So these people have to pay a certain amount of money for healthcare and for living. And what this did is it made the Saudi person competitive in the market. So if you would bring somebody who would accept, let's say, a low a payroll, if you add the money that they have to pay for their health care and the money that they have to pay for renewing their residency there, they would then be in equivalence to a Saudi person, and thus it will be more competitive for everybody. And we will not force companies to employ a Saudi. What this did is, for you to get a job, you have to work well. You have to be good in your job. They're not employing you because you're Saudi. They're employing you because they need you. And that was a huge game changer. That's why, maybe the ethics changed. And I would reckon that if you bring any people and put that law on them, like these certain people, you have to employ them. You have to employ, let's say, white people in this company. The white people, if they knew that they're going to be employed, they're not going to work as hard as if, they knew that they're there not because they're good, they're there because they're white. Which will not make them work harder. This changed. Now the thing changed where Saudis are much more competitive than they were in the past.
I suppose, right, under the old system, right, as you're describing it, the potential for abuse there is pretty large.
Yes.
And so what that can do to the society, again, not saying everyone was like this, but what it can produce is, Saudis who get paid but don't really have to work and then you can have non-Saudis, which are essentially treated like second-class citizens, or not citizens, but they're working, they're working very hard, and you have Saudis who do not have to work who are reaping the benefits of that to some extent.
Yes, this was in the past. But also that's not super fair. The way, the people. Let's be clear. The people who came to Saudi Arabia, even in the past and now, they knew the system. They knew the kafala system. They knew exactly what it was. And for instance, the person that made the comment in your video that we were talking about, he said his father, ran a store for 20 years or 25 years, and he ran it under a Saudi citizen's name. You broke the law right there. You shouldn't run it under a Saudi citizen's name. So taking advantage of the law for 20 or 25 years, and then when the law catches up to you, you say, "Oh no, that wasn't fair." I think isn't really fair. And another point is the people who do come and work in Saudi Arabia, their life changes a lot. If you ask people about who work in Dubai or let's say or Qatar or all these other countries, as opposed to living in Saudi Arabia, they would always say we want to live in Saudi Arabia. First of all, Saudi Arabia is having this Islamic sense. If this person is a Muslim, he would feel more comfortable there. Number two is, and I truly am a person who would claim this, and with all confidence, is the Saudi judicial system is a very fair system. It's very strong. It's not affected by money. It's not affected by power because of its how it's close to the religion. So it is not corrupted like other judicial systems in the Arab world. I don't want to say country names, but if you see the judicial systems in the other Arab countries, it's a joke. It's really a joke. You can just pay money and get out of it. This is not the case in Saudi Arabia, and I'm confident of that. I'm sure of that. It is a fair system. It is as much fair as you can get it. Although the rules in itself might not seem to be fair, but the judicial system is fair to the rules. They do implement the rules. Although the rules, as like this person in the comment section feels that the rule isn't fair, but the courtroom is fair to the rule. They will not go right and left upon to the rule. It will not be corrupted, which is important. That rule that might have hurt a lot of people in the past because some Saudis will take advantage of it has changed. It has completely changed. The rights of an expat or an immigrant that comes work in Saudi Arabia is just cannot be comparable of that in 2010 or whatever.
So my understanding, right, is that there's always going to be two areas that change. There's the law and the culture. So there's still some hang up from the old law and culture around that. But now Saudis have the opportunity to move beyond that legally and can build a healthier culture from that. So I have a friend who, his name is Nasser, and he lives in Riyadh as well. I'll introduce you when I come out there.
Sure.
But he has a couple of different logistics companies. And Nasser is a guy that wants to treat his employees well, no matter where they're from. And he says because he's doing that, it's very easy for him to acquire talent because he is treating his employees better than a lot of the other companies
Makes sense.
around. So what are the other things in sort of Saudi culture right now that you see as areas that really need growth if Saudi Arabia is going to become what you hope it becomes?
I think the acceptance of between Saudi people, the acceptance of different Saudis. This is an area where we will improve in, because I'm sure we will. Also, having nuanced discussions, I think, is something where we can improve on. And I see us as improving on it already. If you have read the Vision 2030, a lot of the aspects of it is just going forward and tackling these issues. Giving opportunities for people who didn't have as much opportunities as before. It's really the Vision 2030 and the transformation of the country is really a game changer. If you see Saudi Arabia in 2012, as you said, from now, it's truly a big difference. The things that I feel that we can, improve on is the ones that I just said. Accepting others' ideas, having a nuance discussion. I believe also, not having this something that I do wrong sometimes, which is not having this, not getting irritated by criticism, I guess, which is something that we do have to improve on. I believe this is mostly the areas where I think we have to improve on. Also in building the nation, we are not there yet. We are not where we want to be. We strive to become the best place to live in the Middle East, at least. This is something that we are true to. We really want to do it. Everybody in the country wants it. We are confident that we will. We are trying our best to do that.
So talking about accepting Saudis with other ideas, one thing I kind of have to ask you about is kind of the idea of sort of religious liberty in Saudi Arabia. So what is your understanding of how that would work now? So if somebody, say, a Saudi atheist or a Saudi Christian, what do you think life is like for that person? How does the law affect that person right now?
Okay. So you have to remember that Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Islam. It is the cradle of Islamic civilization, and the religion of the state is Islam. Okay, and the rules in Islamic science, the rule of Al Jazeera Al Arabiya, or the Arabian Peninsula, is different than how Islam would be ruled, let's say, in Syria or in Egypt. Okay, Al Jazeera Al Arabiya is seen as the pure holy land of Islam. So there is, it's like something like what the Vatican is, except it's a huge country. So it falls under different rules when it comes to that. You will not see, let's say, churches or synagogues. Okay, you would not see people trying to preach a different religion, like publicly. That is true, and that is because of the position of Saudi Arabia in Islam. Okay, it falls under different rules. You can't. It's not fair to sort of criticize, sort of try to implement these things into Saudi Arabia because of the fact that it is the country of the two holy mosques, the citadel of Islam. So it's hard. It's hard to do that. It's really hard to do that. That's number one. Number two, nobody's gonna go look for Christians or Saudi Christians or Saudi atheists or anything like that. If someone wants to practice their religion, regardless of what it is, in their privacy of their own home, they have the complete right to do that. Nobody's gonna knock out their home and say, "Hey, stop being a Christian or stop being an atheist." Nobody cares. However, trying to publicly advertise it, let's say through social media, would get somebody, might, I don't know, but probably would get somebody in trouble.
The Saudi Christians I'm friends with is that, back, before the reforms, that people were much more kind of trying to hunt that kind of thing down.
Right.
Whereas now, but you will mostly be left alone as long as you're not involved in any kind of anti-government type of activity.
I know of many Filipino people, my colleagues, doctors and nurses in the hospital, that gather every Sunday and, they have their thing. We have a deep respect for Abrahamic religions, Christians, Jews. People have, something that people don't understand about, Saudi Arabia is that, or Islam in general, like as if we hate Jews or something, which is absolutely not true. I can remind you that both Christians, the Umayyad Empire, when it first came out of Arabia, most of his citizens were not Muslims; they were Christians and Jews. In Andalusia, after the Reconquista from the Spanish people, they hunted out the Muslims and Jews. Jews were living there and having absolutely fantastic time. So the acceptance, the idea that Islam does not accept other religions is not true. It's actually the contrary. I mean, if you read the Qur'an, it says a lot about Jews and Christians, the people of the book, and the acceptance of people in the book is something true in Islam. It's not something that is made up from recently. It's part of the religion since antiquity. We can see, for instance, the multiple churches in Jerusalem, Syria, in Egypt, that were not changed. They weren't even converted to. I will tell you a very interesting story. When Umar al-Khattab, when they took Jerusalem, he saw the archbishop who said that I will not give the keys to the city. Khalid al-Walid was the general, and he said to Khalid al-Walid, I will not open up the city unless I meet your leader. And when Umar came to the city, he was holding a camel. Somebody was riding the camel, and the archbishop, people were holding him in this, this walking bed. I don't know what you call it, with the gold and everything. And he said, "Who is this? Your guy?" They said, "No, the guy under him, holding the camel is Umar." He said, "Why are you holding the camel for somebody else?" He said, "It's a long trip. This is my companion. He works for me, but it's a long trip, so we take turns." Anyway, when they went inside the city, the first thing Umar said, he said, I want to see the tomb of Solomon, or the tomb of Solomon. And when they took him there, he saw like feces thrown everywhere, and he said, why is this sacred place like this? And why aren't the Jews taking care of it? And the Archbishop said, no, there aren't any Jews in Jerusalem anymore, and people don't like the Jews here, and that's why it's been done to that. And if you look back to history, the reason why was the Jews helped the Persian Empire take over Jerusalem. Then the Romans didn't like that, so they persecuted the Jews in Jerusalem, kicked them out, and it's sort of the backstory of why it reached to that. So what Umar did was, he asked one of the converted Jews, one of the Jews who converted to Islam, he said, I want you to get me 30 families that are Jewish, and I want them to come and live in Jerusalem. Now, some would say, hey, I don't believe that's true, that happened. I would say, okay, even if you don't believe that's true, I believe it's true. I believe that's what Umar said. But even if you don't believe that's true, the fact that we take this as part of our history and religion is huge. We don't want to persecute the Jews. And to be fair, in history, the Muslims never persecuted the Jews at all. It was always Christian Europe who persecuted the Jews. If you go back to history, let's be fair.
Okay, so pushback, a little bit of pushback here, right?
Okay, all right.
While I think what you're saying is generally true, there have been times in, say, North Africa or in Morocco where there have been government persecution of religious minorities, right?
You mean today or in the past?
I'm talking about in the past.
The recent past.
I'm talking about, at intervals throughout history. So, for example, I believe there's some Jewish persecution and Christian persecution under the Fatimids, for example, at certain eras, right? And so I think even in the early period, again, I'm reading through Al-Tabari right now, and what you see is some Muslim leaders are sort of hyper zealous about this kind of thing and are not necessarily, well intentioned towards religious minorities, and others, and I'd say, some of the big pillars like, the Umayyad dynasty and the Abbasids actually were very much invested in the well-being of the Christians under their rule.
And they are, to be honest, for myself, because I was talking to you before about writing the book, which is Not One Shoe Fits All, Democracy versus Meritocracy in a Cultural Context. If you see Arabia was never ruled by one entity, or most of Arabia was never ruled only by three entities. And that was the Umayyad dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, and the Saudi dynasty. They are the three only entities. Now, the Khulafa al-Rashidun, you can count them, but they were like 40 years. It's not enough for you to say that, they really ruled Arabia. And they had dissent right away.
20 years of stability.
Exactly. They had dissent right away. So if you look at stability, it was only done by the Umayyads, the Abbasi, and by the Saudis. Hence, that's why not one shoe can work for everybody. We have great history with dynasties and in accepting dynastic rule in a meritocratical sense, whereas let's say Europe has had a different history with the church and the monarch, and they might when they hear a kingdom that aligns itself with a religion, flashbacks come back, and that's why they're really against that. But that's not fair. That's really not fair. What works for Europe is not necessarily what works for Arabia. I'll give you something. For instance, when we talk about when a government has dissent, in the West, that's good. That's good. A government should have dissent because dissent will sort of put the government in line, so they don't, so they stay in line. Whereas for us, if we say dissent in the government, that means you're not letting us really make a plan for the future. There's unstable things happening in the government, which in sense makes that there's instability in government planning and in governance in general. This is completely different from the West. So for us, dissent is something not making us run the country properly, whereas the West, dissent is something that is needed to run the country properly. This is all based on the cultural context and in the past that people went through. If we see in Arabia, for instance, a dynasty accompanied with religion, we say, oh, this is going to be stable. This is good. We want a dynastic government that has religion in its background, because we know that in our history that this is something that will cause stability. There's not going to be corruption because of the fact that there is a religious background. There's not going to be any fighting, for leadership because it's held on with a dynasty. So they're going to resolve these issues between themselves, and nobody's going to challenge the dynasty. So it's all goes back to your history. So that's why I think Saudi Arabia and the Al Saud dynasty are a form of stability to the Arabian Peninsula.
So we are planning to have a longer conversation about that.
Yeah.
In Riyadh, God willing,
sure,
at some point in the future, because there's something we could talk about for a long time, and we should. For now, we're going pretty long. So what I want to hear now is, what are your hopes for the future of Saudi Arabia?
I hope for the future of Saudi Arabia is the implementation fully of this new vision. It's to have a country that is a country that can give to its people 100 years from now what I received from the country. Oil is going to finish. However, the country should find an economy that is stable and that is able to provide for its people, forever. Another thing is to strive for education, to strive for learning, to read everything, even if it's something that you were told you're not supposed to read. You read everything, understand everything, have nuanced discussions. Build your country to excellence, and the only way you can do that is learning from other people and learning from other experiments. By the way, one more thing: the concept of experiments, in evidence-based science, you base your knowledge on evidence. This was constructed by the Abbasids during the Golden Age in the House of Wisdom. The concept of having a scientific experiment and hence getting like an outcome of it is something from Arab civilization. Also, I want to say one more thing, maybe a message to people outside Saudi Arabia, is we are extremely hospitable people. We take extreme pride in hospitality. Our literature and history will defend that. You will see how we take hospitality as something extreme in our history. We are extremely friendly to everybody, especially people who are very different. We want the people to come and see Saudi Arabia, to come and experience Saudi Arabia and see the people, talk to the people, instead of having this prejudgment, prejudice against Saudi Arabia.
Great. Well, that's exactly the kind of conversation we at Al Maida are trying to, promote. Obviously, there's people who are going to hear things we're saying here and disagree. That's fine. This whole conversation started because you raised some objections in the comment section of one of our videos.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage these kind of conversations and not stand at a distance and judge people, but get to know your neighbors and have honest conversations about it. So thank you so much.
Thank you
for being on the show. You have another thing to say?
There's one point that we didn't really hit into, which was the things that I want the West to change in. That's really important.
Great,
If you let me, it gives me 5-10 minutes. That's really
go,
important.
okay.
Yeah. One thing that the West has a big problem with is they think that they have the right method, and that everybody who doesn't go on in this right method is hence not on the right path, and they are extremely zealous in, let's say, democracy. And actually, I would make a comparison between some zealous people in the West to some zealous Muslims. Let's say ISIS. ISIS think that they have the right methodology, and that's the way you should live your life. And I have to intervene in your country so that you live the life that I think is the right way. This is a problem the West really has to change. The fact that they think that they need to spread democracy or need to spread their way of thought into the world is wrong. This is something that should change. What's the difference between that ideology and, let's say, ISIS, who thinks that they have the right path and they have to implement it forcefully in everybody's life? So I think that the West should also learn to accept others' way of living, even if they think it's wrong. It's okay. Other people think other things are wrong too. Nobody has, like a monopoly on what's right. We're all learning from each other. This is why Al-Ma'idah is doing what it does. That's it.
So I have something to say on this, because I actually have some strong agreement here that the sort of a lot of popular American approach to these kind of things, and the sort of Islamist kind of approach to these things. When I say Islamist, I'm talking about these sort of essentially revolutionary Islamic ideas. Both the sort of like, some parts of American society, which largely inhabit the far left, but not exclusively, basically want to change the world by kind of burning down the existing system and replacing it right now, this instant, with exactly what we want to see. And that kind of thinking is always dangerous, because it often leads to, usually leads to a worse outcome than what you start with. So I think what a lot of people would like to see is, Mohammed bin Salman resign from his power, establish a popular democracy, and
it won't work. It won't work.
And cover the Kaaba in rainbow flags, right? That's
not going to happen for sure. That's not going to happen.
No, right. Yeah. It's not going to happen. Yeah. And not only do they not understand Saudi Arabia, they don't understand their own history at that point.
Yeah.
Because if you compared, say, something like the kafala system in Saudi Arabia 20 years ago to, say, Victorian London, and to be like a poor person living in Victorian London, I would imagine somebody in the kafala system would be in a better situation than the person in Victoria, than like a kid in a workhouse in Victorian London, or at least comparable. And so when you have thinkers like John Locke and all these sort of ideas that we hold, importantly in the West, London was a terrible place to be for a lot of people. Great place for others. And these things happen incrementally. And so as a Christian, one thing that Jesus says is that the kingdom of God is like yeast in bread. And what that means is that transformation for good in the world is gradual and incremental, and changes things in a way you almost don't notice it's changing. And that's that's what I'm really looking for in the world. Is I'm looking for ways to make incremental differences, a little bit, and then larger changes, are often need to be a result of those small changes, because if you just try and impose your will through revolutions and force, it's just going to lead to bigger catastrophes.
Absolutely, I agree.
Well, great. Well, thank you again for having this conversation. I'm looking forward to talking to you more. And thank you guys for listening to the Al-Ma'idah Initiative podcast. We'll be back next time.